Hey, what's up guys? In today's video, we're responding to a pretty standard no power call. An animal got into a line, popped the fuse open. Actually, he got into the source side of the cutout in this one. So it didn't blow the cutout fuse on the transformer. It actually took out the whole sideline. Not a big deal. We found the animal on the ground, but rather than just refuse and close the sideline, we inspected the structure a little bit. Wasn't quite up to standard. A whole lot of porcelain up there. And from the ground, it looked like one of the dead end units had a pretty good crack in it. So we strap on the GoPro cam. We might as well get rid of all that porcelain, change the dead end units, cut out lightning arrestor. But before we get into it, I do want to bring up the Utility Expo. I went for the first time in 2023 and man, I was blown away. The sheer size of this show, it's incredible. It's one of the only shows that actually lets you get hands-on demo of the equipment, tools, and the tech that can really make a difference in your day-to-day operations. The Utility Expo 2025, it's coming up fast. I'm going to be there all week, and I've got an exclusive code so that you guys can be there too. Use my code Aaron30 to save 30% off on your admissions to the largest trade show in the utility industry. Follow the link in the description, and again, use my code Aaron30. It's good through to August 22nd, and that's to save 30% off your admissions to the Utility Expo 2025. I hope to see you guys all there. Now, let's get to the video.
So the first step when working on any de-energized lines is to check for potential. Potential meaning voltage. The red attachment on the end of my hot stick is a proximity detector. The setting on it, where it is a 12 kV system, we bring that setting up to the 12 kV mark, even though there's only 7,200 volts on the line itself. So we have this line isolated at the main road. That's the switch set blue at the main road. So our first step here is to check for potential, in which there is none. Oftentimes people inquire about testing your equipment on something live to verify it's working. If there's some live conductors close by, perfect. If not, the proximity detectors do run through a self-test function. So there was no voltage. Our next step is to install our ground. This is going to be our trip ground, which will also ultimately function as a bond. It's important to slap your grounds on quickly. You don't want to tease the line. If by chance that line did become energized, once that duct belt is on the primary seated tightly, it's going to blow the fuse or the recloser or whatever's feeding that line. If you start teasing that, that's when you can draw some arcs and get some arc flashing going on. So I just hang my stick over there. We're not going to be touching the neutral. I wouldn't recommend hanging your stick on a neutral or phase like that if you're going to be transferring that. It's a good way to drop your stick, but we're not going to be touching the neutral. So we just hang that in place, and our next step is to go over the pole and install our cluster bar. So the purpose of this, it's a little bit redundant because the neutral is attached to a bolt that's not on an insulator, and that bolt goes right through the pole. So ultimately, if the primary were to get energized, that voltage would travel through the neutral and into the pole. But this is just an extra step within the equal potential bonding and grounding rules, that in the event of, let's say, a lightning strike or backfeed, that voltage will travel around the pole in its entirety through the neutral to make sure that while I'm touching the pole and the conductor, there should be no difference in potential. So this black stuff you're seeing on the cutout, that's just from the arc flash where the squirrel got across between the steel bracket and the insulator, and where it is on the top side of that cutout, he did trip out that line. You could hear when I was tapping on those insulators, one of them had a dull thud and the other one had a ringing sound. That's just kind of a little check you can do if you're not sure if a bell is broken or not. I'd be awful careful doing it on energized conditions, but sometimes it's hard to see those cracks, so I was just demonstrating how you can find a crack in porcelain if you try to, we call it the ring test. But basically now we're just going to short out the secondary. So there's a few ways we could do this. You can hear a generator in the background. So if that generator is not hooked up properly, that could feed back up through that transformer, step that voltage up to 7,200 volts, and yeah, it'd be pretty dangerous. So we're basically shorting out the secondary lugs of the transformer. A few other options are to remove the leads from the transformer or remove the meter. So first thing we're going to do, this tap clamp, it wasn't on very tight, and it's actually kind of seized up. It happens once they get old, I imagine there was a little bit of arcing in that tap clamp. We gotta strip it off anyways, just to kind of change out when we resag that primary. You don't want to leave that tapped on. You can actually even see some corrosion on that stirrup on the primary, that little bit of a white color there. In fact, everything up here is seized on pretty good. And I'm just noticing there some arcing on the bolt and the pole is what I was pointing to. So either the fault current when the squirrel was standing on the steel traveled through him for a moment and in towards the pole, or there could be some hairline cracks in that cutout as well. I don't see any cracks in the cutout though. You can see all these bolts are all pretty rusty. We're gonna change that all out. Right by my left hand, that's the lightning arrestor. It's a high resistance path to ground. It's rated for a specific voltage. I think that one's 15 kV. So if the voltage, no, sorry, I'm wrong. That one's a 9 kV. So if voltage exceeds that 9 kV from, let's say, a lightning strike, that over voltage will bleed through that arrestor and into ground. Probably take out the fuse on the takeoff as well. So you can see the path to ground on the bottom. I'm just removing that. Those lightning arrestors come mounted on the transformers nowadays, so that way if they do happen to blow or take a hit, it's not going to take out the whole sideline. It'll blow the fuse particular to that transformer instead. It's a much better setup. You can see the cracks in the porcelain in the back there. They're pretty obvious in this case. Like I said, we could see them from the ground. A lot of times you can't see them at all. So the new lightning arrestor we're putting on, it's a 10 kV arrestor, and it's a new polymer type. The polymer stuff now, it's much more UV resistant than the traditional plastics that were installed on poles 40 years ago. And you can see right there that primary voltage traveled through that bolt towards that guy wire. So we're just going to snug that up. That had nothing to do with the arc. Those poles just kind of dry up and shrink up a little bit sometimes. So there, I'm going to pause the screen here just for a sec. But you can see the cracks. There's 2 cracks. Eventually that would completely fail. If the second bell was cracked like that, those guys would have blown apart. For 7200 volts, you do only need 1 bell. The second one is just an overbuild. So in the case that one does crack, it's not going to trip the line out. So taking the primary lead out of the transformer, that's a bare copper wire. Years and years ago, that's all we ran from the transformer to the cutout was just bare copper wires. Now where we do have so many squirrel and bird incidents, we have 2 options. We have what we call bird wire, which is copper with a really thick insulation. It's kind of hard to peel. That's what this is in my hand right now. And we also have some gray line covering. I've showed it in a few videos. It's just a gray tube that slides over that's rated for like 20,000 volts or something. So we're replacing that wire just so we don't lose any more animal friends that decide to climb up on top of that transformer. And then we've got what we call a squirrel guard. There's a few different types. For a regular transformer, it doesn't really matter if you use one of the mesh ones like this or the solid ones. The mesh ones are more designed to look for hot spots with the thermal cam. So if you are using bushing covers or squirrel guards on the bushings of a recloser or any of the equipment in a substation, generally you want to use the mesh type. So there is some open air that you can see that heat coming off of if there's a bad connection with your thermo cam. So that's brand new copper, brand new cutout. We don't really have to brush that stuff up too much. There's not a huge difference in metals there. It's not like we're going from copper to aluminum, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of corrosion. The same door, it's still good. It's universal with the newer style cutouts. So we're able to reuse that door. Now on the butt ground, the pole ground side of things, you could see how corroded that is. There's lots of oxidation. It's pretty green. You don't want to plug that back in as is. You really want to shine up that copper so it makes a good connection on the bottom of the lightning arrestor, or any connection for that matter. Whenever you're making connections on existing wire that's in the air and it's corroded, even aluminum, you want to shine that up to make a good connection. Aluminum generally won't turn colors. It'll just kind of show up as more of a dull gray. So when you give it a brush, it will shine quite a bit. It's pretty obvious. And we're just gonna wire this guy back up according to the old standard. We're not going to bother mounting one on the transformer or anything for this particular setup. So we're just going to plug those 2 leads into the top of the cutout. A lot of times we'll use a copper C-clamp and bond it to the lead. Doesn't really matter for this particular connection. So when you're looking over at that stirrup, you can see that stirrup is a press-on type. That's not something we use anymore. All of our stirrups are now removable. But we'll give this piece of copper some brushing. I could have replaced that little piece if I needed to, but it's not necessary as long as we get the connection shining. And we got to get rid of all that corrosion on the stirrup. The stirrup is still good. There's no sense in replacing that. If it had burnt up or if it was pitted real bad for any reason, I would have used a new stirrup, one of the bolt-on type that we can install with our grab all. And our tap clamps, they're now, it's a copper color. I'm not sure. The entire thing is not solid copper. It's, I'm assuming, an alloy. They seem to be much better for corrosion resistance, especially coastline areas. We switched to them a couple of years ago. We're having pretty good luck with them. And again, a lot of times, I mentioned this in videos about coiling your primary wire. It's for 2 reasons. One is they say it could cause some inductive reactance. I mean, you're splitting hairs there. That would be minimal. Reason I don't like to have a coiled up lead is it's too long. If ever there's a fault or if the pole breaks, that's just going to hang down a lot more than it should. We'll get back to the tap clamp in a minute. Now we're going to change out those bells. So you notice I use a strap, a nylon strap, as opposed to wrapping my puller cable around the pole. If you wrap your steel cable around the pole and get in that habit, it's going to kink your cable and ruin them. And those come-alongs are like $600 a pop. You also want to have your strap coming straight off the pole. You don't want to have the knot and that bent back over the knot. That will reduce the strength of the strap significantly. So when I pull these out, we do have these special order dead end units. They're good for 15 kV. And the reason we use those, and just tightening that guy up, but the reason we have those is for this exact application where you're just replacing old porcelain bells. They're almost the same length. They're a tad bit longer. Sometimes you can do a straight swap without resagging the lines. In this case here, where it's only number 2 ACSR, that's number 2. It's been a while, but I think it's aluminum coated, steel reinforced, or something like that. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, guys. I am going to lose quite a bit of sag, so I will have to resag that. But normally the dead end units we use are probably about 4 inches longer than this guy. It's still going to help me out because I only have a little bit of play in the wire until I run into that stirrup where I would have had to cut it out. So that just goes in with a couple pins and a couple cotter keys. And we'll just take our Milwaukee impact and loosen this guy off. This is one of the older dead end clamps. It damages the wire a bit, unlike the new ones. They seem to be a little flatter on the inside. But you also notice I got a little piece of tape on the tail there. I'll show you why that is in just a sec. But these guys, you really have to loosen them off because there's kind of a hump in the middle. You got to be able to clear it through that hump. But once I take up that slack and shove it through, I'm starting to get a really unnecessarily long tail going on here. That can be damaging if you're ever doing hotline using a rubber blanket, for one. Not that we'd ever do hotline on a structure like this that's only feeding one customer. But also it can cause radio interference as well. So I'm going to be cutting that off. And when you cut ACSR, unless it's a piece that's at least 8 inches to a foot long, all those aluminum and steel strands are going to go flying everywhere. You don't want to lose those all in the ground if you're grabbing to go picking those up, especially if you're on a farm or something near animals. The cows will get into that aluminum and it's definitely not good for them. I should mention too, the fellow on the ground, that's Johnny Smooth. He'll be with me when I head down to Kentucky this year. But we give that a snap. No strands. Also doesn't fall to the ground. We'll chuck that in my bucket there. Pretty well all set to go. Just have to release the come-alongs, remove the strap, and don't forget your secondary grounds. So before I do that, we're putting that tap clamp on, but I'm not going to over tighten it yet. We'll do that with the stick. But make sure you get your secondary grounds. You have to use your rubber gloves for that. We have had a case years ago where somebody forgot them to close a line, and it's pretty devastating. Take your hot stick and always remove the duckbill from the primary first. Now, the reason I left that tap clamp on loose instead of using a screwdriver or wrench to tighten it is they're pretty easy to over tighten. When you use your grab all to tighten these guys up, pretty well as much force as you can get twisting it, it's still going to come off. If you put a wrench on that when the guy comes with the hot stick to remove it, it might not be doable. There's Johnny. Anyways, another day done. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see y'all soon.